KWCO FM HD1 Chickasha.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Rath. I'm the president of the Chamber. On behalf of our chairman, Tim Hushback, and our board of directors and our membership, welcome to Chickasha, Mr. Bob Quigley. And the Oil and Gas Journal has been around well over 100 years. And I had the distinct privilege to get to work with Mr. Tippie in Houston, Texas for almost 7 years via the Oil and Gas Journal. And one of the things that was really cool about that time was that we had a team that was asking a simple question: are we as good as we could be as an industry-leading publication and a weekly? And we did focus groups, and we had to listen to some of our folks tell us we weren't as good as we thought in some areas and great in others. And then we used that feedback to build branding campaigns that we launched on radio and billboards and multimedia, internet, which was starting to come online, and all of that led to site license agreements with major U.S. companies to build circulation so that we could sell more advertising and build a really neat platform for the future. Bob took over after John Kennedy had served as editor-in-chief of the journal since 1966. And one of the things that was most fun about our time together at the Oil and Gas Journal was looking at our distribution channels globally and having the chance to go to Europe and work with our vendors to understand the dynamics of getting a weekly publication from Tulsa, Oklahoma, executed out of Houston, Texas, printed in another location, and then shipped overseas to all over the planet. The one thing that's really great about that time is not so much the individuals, but the fact that we were focused on understanding that the next 100 years for the Oil and Gas Journal mattered. And one of the things you've heard me talk about for Chickasha is that the next 100 years for us as the current leadership body in this room matters. And we're asking questions: who are we? What are we doing? Where are we going? And we're delighted to have Bob here today, and he'll get a more extended introduction here in just a moment from Tim Hushback, our chairman. And that will happen as well via Pat Brooks and First National Bank. And you guys have witnessed some of the things going on in Grady County, from Mr. Brooks' magical flying machine from aerial photographs. We're thrilled to have First National Bank as a strategic partner and be able to have from Houston, Texas, Bob Tippie, who has roots of time in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I think when you get through today, you'll have a better perspective of what's going on in the international and global oil and gas plays, and maybe the scoop as well. And we're absolutely thrilled that you're here, Bob. So thank you very much for getting here. Bob had delayed flights through the Southwest and ended up spending the night at the airport area in Houston and getting here this morning. And I texted Tim Hushback and Heather Witt, chair and past chair, it's raining in Tulsa, when Bob got here. And the story I had heard over the years was that back in the old days, the oil and gas drilling offshore for the first time in the 40s was secretive. And they didn't want folks to know. And the story I always heard was that they texted or called in, it's raining in Tulsa, when they discovered oil offshore. Tippie and I disagree as to whether or not that's factual or not, but it sounds like a great story for his airplane arriving today. So we're delighted you're here as a group to hear from Mr. Hushback and then Mr. Pat Brooks, and then, of course, from our honored guest, Mr. Bob Tippie. Thank you all for coming today. Tim?
Thank you, Mark, and we are thrilled to have everybody in the room. It's always nice to see a full room out and we really appreciate Mr. Tippie, all the trials and tribulations he had to go to get here today, so that's wonderful. Speaking of trials and tribulations, a lot of things have been going on in the world, so at this point I think it's appropriate. I would like to ask one of our board members, Bill Conner, if he would say a prayer for everyone.
Gracious Heavenly Father, Lord our God and Creator, we just want to pause and there in front of the grace and say, thank you, Lord, for this day. But most of all, we thank you, Lord, for your Son, Jesus Christ, and what he did for us on the cross. Heavenly Father, I thank you, Lord, for the setting-minded men and women who have assembled here today to make a better community, just watch over us, guide us and lead us, and help us to be better stewards of what you need. Give you the honor and the glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it. Events like this can't happen without sponsorship, obviously. And we've got a sponsor today that has been a long time fixture in this community. And when I say long time, I mean 1892 long time. So nobody probably has a better record of being in business in Chickasha longer than that, I wouldn't think, because Indians went to the time. So we're very fortunate. And that sponsor is First National Bank and Trust. And somebody who's been a fixture at First National for a fairly long time. He did inform me he wasn't here in 1892, and I never questioned that. So, but that person is Pat Brooks. And Pat has really made it a personal mission to be involved to help enrich the community in Chickasha. I remember when I came here about 18 years ago, 18, 20 years ago, somewhere in there, he's one of the first people I remember welcoming me to the community, just shaking my hand. And I don't know, you never know why you would call somebody like that, but he made the impression on me that made me feel welcome to this community. And I think that's just from a long time of being involved in the community and making many people feel welcome in the community. Pat has served as in the capacity I'm in now as the Chickasha Chamber of Commerce. He's led it. He served and led the Chickasha Historical Society. He served and led the USAO Foundation Board of Trustees. He's served and led the Chickasha Public School Foundation. And he's donated a lot personally and financially to this community to make it a great place. And as the chairman of First National Bank and Trust, he's overseen many investments throughout the community that have touched on the construction industry, the energy industry, education, churches, and homes in Chickasha. And they now serve across a 5-county service area. He, like his father before, Curtis Brooks, that's established a legacy of honor and integrity and service throughout this community. And most importantly, he has shown leadership over the years. So at this point, I would ask that you give Pat Brooks a welcome, and he's going to come up and introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Tim. That introduction to me wasn't necessary because I am not the speaker today. Anyhow, on behalf of all my fellow helpers at First National Bank, we're privileged to be able to sponsor our program and our speaker here today. In a couple of thoughts to set our speaker up here, I had a chance. Somebody sent me a video of a program recently, and it was a talk that was given at an energy conference. I believe it was in Oslo, Norway, in March of this year. And the title of the talk is Green Disruption. And basically what the speaker was saying is that we have a combination going on right now of evolution of solar energy, gathering, if you will, batteries, storage, electric vehicles, and driverless technology that are all converging to the point that by 2030, which is 14 years from now, there will be no more internal combustion engines made in the United States. And then another article that was sent to me said that the last person to require a driver's license in the United States was already born. And so, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands of who believes either of those two forecasts in this group, because we're all here to learn more about fossil fuels. But at the end of the day, fossil fuels are just and efficient storage of solar energy. So it's all connected. Bob Tippie, our speaker today, is editor of the Oil and Gas Journal, a weekly trade magazine, and also editor for its website, the Oil and Gas Journal Online. Since joining the journal staff in 1977, and there's a number of you in here that weren't born in 1977, so he knows a lot of history about this business. He has written on all technical, economic, and political aspects of the international petroleum industry. He writes the journal's weekly editorials and the weekly column, The Editor's Perspective. His work has won awards from American Business Media, New York Society of Business Press Editors, Association of Petroleum Writers, International Association of Energy Economics, International Association of Energy Advocates, and he goes on and on. He has won the Cicero Speechwriting Award 3 times and was the 2010 recipient of the American Business Media's G.D. Crane Jr. Award, honoring contributions to the development of editorial excellence in business media. He became the journal's chief editor in 1999. Also was the editor-in-chief for the International Petroleum Encyclopedia from 1997 to 2001. He has directed many Penwell Petroleum Group conferences. He's a native of St. Louis, Missouri, married, 2 daughters, no grandkids yet. He served as an officer in the U.S. Air Force for 4 years and has a degree in journalism from the University of Tulsa. Used to live in Tulsa, now currently resides in Houston. And with that, Bob, it's your turn.
Thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here, to be invited to be here. And it's always a treat to come out in groups, where people do the work. And I love those photographs. Those are great. Getting well there. My daughters, poor girls, they didn't grow up. Look at that girl. There's a rig. Dad. We go down to Galveston, and in the harbor there's usually a couple of offshore rigs. Now there are several offshore rigs down there because they're stacked. But that's a jackup. That's a semi. Oh, Dad. Well, now one of them works for Offshore Magazine. It is really nice to be here. Thank you for sponsoring the luncheon. Thank you all for coming out. Just to be ornery, I looked up to see what the price of crude oil was 2 years ago. You don't want to know. It's $104.56 per barrel on the New York Mercantile Exchange. Of course, things were just starting to look a little shaky 2 years ago. 1 year ago, we were about at that stage in the slump where the big companies were saying, we've already cut our spending and we've laid off a number of people, but if the price goes below $50 a barrel, we're gonna cut again. And it did, and they did. Went below $50 a barrel. Now here we are saying, oh boy, $50 a barrel. Let's have more of that. It's all a matter of perspective where you are in one of these slumps. And I've been at this long enough. I've written a few more of these than I like to admit. I'm going to talk about that, of course, today. This presentation is based on Oil and Gas Journal's mid-year forecast, which appeared in the July 4th issue of the Oil and Gas Journal. I only brought one copy. I'll leave it here if anybody wants it. You can have it. I'm going to show you a lot of the numbers from that, but don't worry, I'm not going to talk about the numbers. I'm going to bring a lot of other stuff into the presentation. But the mid-year is just kind of the skeleton for the rest of the program. I'm going to hurry through so we have time for questions. So ask me anything you like. To give credit where credit is due, the mid-year and its annual predecessor, the forecasting review, is the work of Dr. Conlon Jude. She is our senior editor for economics. She's assisted by Laura Bell, our statistics editor. And I've got some things to hear from our capital budget report, which appeared in March. To put some things in perspective, Conlon does that as well. I get involved a lot in the advisory work with that. then I take that work and build a presentation that you'll see. If you if something strikes you as really insightful and illuminating, I'll be glad to talk to you about it. If something seems just totally unreasonable and out of the question, I'll be glad to put you in touch with Carmen. The market is trying to balance. The market's always trying to balance. It's been out of balance. There's been too doggone much oil in the market worldwide. That's why prices did what they did. That red line is the price of Brent crude. You can see what happened to it. The blue lines are just quarterly gross oil balances, oil demand versus oil supply. That's kind of a gross calculation, but it does show you how out of balance we have been. And this chart also shows that the price has turned up. And I get the sense talking to people in the industry that one's over, that was a bad one, it's over, back to normal again. And the one thought I'm going to leave you with today is no, it's not back to normalcy. Everything has changed. It doesn't mean we're going to be as down as the industry, as the upstream industry has been for the past couple of years. It doesn't mean that at all. The industry will come back. Oil and gas will still be used, and I'll have some responses to your green video at the end here. People will make money in the industry, but it's going to be different, and the market's going to be different, and I'll talk about that. Things have changed fundamentally. But let's look at that balance. Conlon put together that chart. You can see supply and demand trying to come back together. Supply is the black line. The red is demand, and that in about the middle of this year, things are coming back together. Those are what the numbers look like. And sorry about the numbers, but these are important. This is how I assess the oil market. These numbers come from the International Energy Agency, which is one of three agencies that does that. The Energy Information Administration of the United States does this. OPEC does this. But it's an oil balance. So you just take demand. You just take a stab at what demand's going to be. Net out some of the other things like non-OPEC supply, natural gas liquids from OPEC, and then we used to make an assumption about stocks, about inventories, and that was guesswork. But you can kind of look at the price curve and tell whether inventories are going to go up or down, and then solve for OPEC crude. That was the key variable. What does the world need from OPEC in the way of crude oil? And hopefully OPEC would supply something near that level. Now, this is easier to do in the rearview mirror than it is from the windshield because the oil market's big. It's hard to assess in contemporaneous terms. So people aren't sitting there making these adjustments. But over time, these are the factors that change to bring the market into balance. OPEC no longer plays that role. That's a huge change. I'll talk about in a little bit. Now we just take a stab at what we think OPEC's going to produce in the way of crude oil for the rest of the year, and we've assumed 32.6 billion barrels a day, which was the average for the first quarter. There will be some individual changes, but we think that's about what OPEC is going to come out of OPEC countries on an annual average basis this year. And we solve for the balancing items, which are mostly stock changes. That bottom line is important. And I plotted that over the past several years, 2012 through 2016. So you can follow that stock change number. Went from a build of 200,000 barrels a day, which is not extraordinary in 2012, a draw of 600,000 barrels a day in 2013. We would normally consider that to be a pretty strong draw. That 600,000 barrels a day is about the outside of the flux in inventories from the balancing items. And 2014, 900,000 barrel a day build. Whoops, we're getting into a surplus there. And then 2015, 1.6 million barrels a day stock build. That is a crusher, and that's what happened to prices. And it's really easy to see right here. And the good news is that in 2016, we think the build is going to come down to 200,000 barrels a day for the whole year, for an average for the whole year. Now, I have these numbers come from the June oil market report of the International Energy Agency, the one we used as the basis for the mid-year forecast. The IEA has come out with its July oil market report, and it sees a little more demand and a little less non-OPEC supply. So that's even better, because supply has to fall, demand has to rise for the market to balance. And a month on from these numbers, IEA thought that was even a little more in progress, to the extent that if you net out the numbers for the whole year, you get a slight inventory draw for the year, which is good news. Global demand, the right things are happening with global demand. It's starting to come back up. The key things here are those blue bars, are China. China for the past number of years, since about 2004, in fact, has been the engine of demand growth. And China is kind of sputtering. Its economy is slowing down. It's trying to restructure its economy a little bit. Demand in China has come down. That's part of why we have a surplus. But that lime green line is growing. That's the world outside of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is the OECD is the industrialized world. And green is the non-OECD world without China, and it's growing. So something is taking up the slack a little bit from China, and that something is India. India probably will become the next really important oil-consuming nation. I threw this in yesterday because the International Monetary Fund came out with its World Economic Outlook for July. It's an adjustment, and it adjusted its projections for world gross domestic product growth downward by a little bit because of Brexit, because of Britain's departure from the European Union, and the text there I highlighted. IMF sees more downside than upside in that because of the uncertainty. Okay, so world economic growth is crucial to oil demand. So if something is going to slow down the economy, that's going to take a little bit out of demand growth. So this is kind of a negative influence. Whether it comes true, we'll just have to see. But that's I think that's important to note. This is supply change year over year. You can see how we had a lot of growth in 2014, 2015. You can see how that's come down. Okay, as I said, supply has to shrink, and it most definitely is. It's kind of complicated, but the key thing is look at the orange bar that's right below the red line. That's U.S. That's U.S. supply change, and you can see how the United States production really fed supply growth in 2014 and 2015, and that, of course, is because of the unconventional resources, the shale plays. It was really spectacular, but that has shrunk, of course. And you can see that just with the orange moving from the top of the line, meaning growth, to the bottom of the line over on the right, meaning contraction. OPEC crude, you can see coming up a little bit. That's important. The long and short of it is that there's still too much oil in inventory. These are OECD stocks, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's really the only place where we get good, accurate inventory information. There's starting to be some better inventory information, but OECD is still kind of a standard. And the current number, the 2016 number, is that black bar way up on the left and the top, and you can see how far above that is above the red line, which is the average for 2011 and 2015. So there's still too much oil in inventory. There has to be a stock draw, and as you saw from those earlier numbers, we're starting to see that. Here you can see the balance quarter by quarter, and you can see us going into a stock withdrawal situation if these numbers come true in the second half. 400,000 barrels a day in the third quarter, 500,000 barrels a day in the fourth quarter. So, the right things are happening in the market, but they are subject to disruption. I like always to point out that when we talk about supply, there are always wiggle influences in there. Right now, production is climbing from Iran because it has escaped the international sanctions. It's climbing in Iraq. Iraq is now almost 4.5 million barrels a day. I don't know how long the security problems there will allow that to happen, but that production has climbed despite the security problems in Iraq. So Iraq is strong. Russia has been increasing. I think that may be good for another year or two. Some of the increase came because of favorable tax treatment on Russian producers. The government is fiscally distressed and is changing the taxes so producers don't have quite the tax advantages they did before. That will take its toll on Russian production at some point, but Russian production is still pretty high. U.S. offshore production is still increasing because of project momentum. That will end as projects get completed and production comes on stream. There are not a lot of large projects in the queue to replace them. There are some companies are starting to invest in big projects again, but I don't think U.S. offshore is going to have major growth for some time. Production is down in Libya because of civil problems. Political unrest in Venezuela is dire. I don't know how long Venezuela can go without people just going in the streets. It's a bad situation. The production's coming down there already, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Venezuela really turn upside down. And I just hope a lot of people don't get hurt in that. Nigerian production is coming down because of a resurgence of sabotage in the oil-producing areas, including offshore, which means the bad guys are getting pretty sophisticated. That's not abating. So Nigerian production is down. And Brazil has the Petrobras scandal and geopolitical or local political problems, cutbacks in investment and so forth. So I think Brazilian production will be down. I think all three of those are probably down for a while. U.S. onshore is down, of course, because of the drilling slump. U.S. total, when you take onshore and offshore together, the declines onshore outweigh the increases offshore, so U.S. total production is down. That can change quickly. And then earlier in the spring, we had some of those kind of fleeting variables. We had fires in the oil sands region of Alberta that got heavy oil production, 5 million barrels a day or so. And there were strikes in Kuwait that looked like they might get serious, but didn't. Did cut the Kuwait production for us. So this just shows that the supply numbers can change with circumstances. The chart on the top, by the way, shows world supply in the green bar and OPEC crude production in the blue bars. The green line and the blue bar. So that's what the chart is. We'll move now to the United States. I'm going to blitz through these pretty fast and just hit highlights. We do the where we borrow heavily on IEA for the international stuff. We do our own U.S. stuff. But to show history, I've just put the relevant slide from Energy Information Administration off to the side. So the chart just shows you trends but the numbers of what we did. On these, these are the modesty numbers. The black numbers are what we projected in the mid-year forecast, the most recent one. The red numbers are what we forecast in January in the forecasting review. So you can check and see how we did. That's why I call those the humility numbers. I think it's important to compare expectations from one part of the year to the next part of the year, because markets respond to expectations, and it's interesting to see what people were thinking at the beginning of the year compared with the middle. The key trends here are gasoline is up, and we really thought gasoline had flattened out in terms of consumption. It's going to remain the dominant product in the U.S. market, but it was flat. There just wasn't going to be much growth. But gasoline responds more to price than anything. It's price of incomes of people. And of course, the price has been low, and people are driving. and so gasoline production has gone up. We've also had a reversal of expectation with distillate. Most of distillate is ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel, highway diesel. That is the growth product in the United States, but it's shrinking, as you can see. And the only explanation I have for that is that diesel use is a function more of economic activity than price. Gasoline is real sensitive to price. Diesel is real sensitive to economic activity, which has been pretty sluggish, as you know. So those are surprises. LPG and ethane, I'll have more to say on that in a little bit. That's an important part of the market. Supply, crude and condensate are down sharply. As you can see, our renewables down a little bit. Natural gas liquids are up, and this because gas production is still pretty robust. That's a very important trend. Again, I'll have more to say on that. The chart doesn't totally correlate to those numbers because the chart doesn't have processing gains in it. And I put processing gains. Processing gains are the volumetric expansion that hydrocarbons undergoes and what we find in their density shrinks. Stocks are still too high. I'm not going to talk too much about that. You can see that in the numbers. Again, it's just like globally, we still have to work off stocks before we're out of the woods. Imports are interesting. They're coming down. Exports are rising, mostly because of product exports, although crude exports are allowed now. But the United States has become a major exporter of oil products. But those lines are converging. But we're still a net importer of almost 5 million barrels a day. And I think that's important to know. We talk about energy independence, and we have to be great and all that. How do you define energy independence? If you talk about oil, we are still dependent on the world for between 4.5 and 5 million barrels a day of oil. So we're not there, and we're not going to get there anytime soon. If you add natural gas, if you've taken all of North America, then energy independence begins to look more realistic. Good thing to have, but we're not there. Natural gas prices, kind of flat. The dotted lines are the kind of the confidence range, and they just mean that nobody really knows what the gas price is going to do. There's some Energy Information Administration. Gas is a big deal, of course. Production is up, even with the shrinkage of the drilling effort. That Marcellus and Utica shales, that is a world-class resource that is changing everything, and that's where a lot of that comes from. Exporting more, you'll see that in a second. You can see the exports down here at LNG. We're not gangbusters on LNG exports, but 5 years ago we were talking about how much LNG we were going to be importing. Maybe 8 years ago we were going to be importing. The key thing, and it's not really evident in the numbers, is that the United States is exporting a lot more gas than we used to from the Appalachian Basin, from Marcellus and Utica, and displacing Western Canadian gas in Eastern Canada. It's just moving that gas back up the pipeline into Western Canada. A lot of it's coming down into the U.S., into the Western U.S. By exports there. So we're exporting. The United States is exporting to Canada in the east, and it's importing from Canada in the west. That's the key thing to understand about exports right now. Except for Mexico, Mexican exports to Mexico are increasing rapidly. This is, the United States has become a major gas producer. That's the story. But I said things have changed fundamentally, and they have. I want to bang on that nail a little bit. The industry is getting smaller, and I think it's going to stay small. It doesn't mean it's not going to make money. It is, but you can't have back-to-back cuts in capital spending of more than 25% per year, and not end up with a lot less equipment and a lot less assets, a lot less capital to do work with, and that's what's happened. And it's not over yet. This is from our capital spending survey. we survey all industry operations, upstream and downstream pipelines, just for the U.S. There are some other surveys out there by Barclays and the Cohen Company. They do a good detailed global survey, but it's all upstream, it's all E&P. In our capital budget survey, we were seeing capital spending down 25% this year after a 36% decline last year. Those are big cuts in industry capital spending. Cohen just came out with its mid-year deal, and it lowered its expectation for capital spending from the survey it produced at the beginning of the year. So the cuts continue, and the expectations for cuts continue. We are seeing some investments in major projects. The one that leaps to mind is Chevron in the Kashagan field off Kazakhstan, 260,000 barrels a day, I forget how many billions of dollars. There are some of the big companies are trying to cash in on the low costs that are in place right now. And so they're very selectively moving into some big projects. But these numbers here that would show, these charts here would show the big companies and show declines except for Shell, and Shell increases just because it bought a BG Group. These numbers are declining, but the big companies were cutting capital expenditures even before the price crash. They had stubbed their toes on a lot of big projects that didn't work. It just proved to be unmanageable and came in way over budget. It proved to be very troublesome, and they were concentrating on capital discipline rather than growth, in a trend that began in 2012 or earlier. So the big companies were already cutting back, and then they ran into price headwinds and cut quite a bit. So those are going to have effects for many years. Of course, the U.S. workforce has shrunk. I hope you can see that faint green line. That continues. There are still BHP, just like a lot of people in Houston. The workforce is going to be down. That doesn't come back quickly. Some people are going to say that it has as much of this fun as they can stand. Drilling costs have come down. A lot of people are saying, they've come down so much that the industry can do more with less dollar input, and that's true. That's true. But when you look at how much the rig count has come down, to make an idea of how cheap it is, production is going to come down as it has. And you can see that these numbers, these are government numbers. Right now we're just back down to where we were in 2009 and 2010. So it's not like everything's gotten chronically much cheaper than it was before. I didn't think that the companies were going to be able to squeeze 30% concessions out of the service companies. They did. Of course, that's hurt with the service companies. I don't think all those are going to last, but the industry is going to be very cost cautious, very, very cautious about investment from now on. Drilling has come down. Those are tables we run in the journal every week. The U.S. numbers are on the left. The left half is last year. The right half is the corresponding period of this year. You can see how far down we are from last year. The most recent number for the U.S. is 440. Remember that number. We've also had a decline internationally, of course. This comes from UBS, and it shows land drilling in the United States, the rig count on land in the United States. You can see how it's come down. But the interesting thing is the red part they put over on the right, the new lower rig norm. They don't expect the rig count to come back to anywhere near its level, and I agree with that. We said we had 440 rigs in the most recent rig count in our chart. UBS estimates that to keep oil production flat, to overcome the high decline rates in shale wells, in other words, you need 730 land rigs. And to raise production by 500,000 barrels a day, they say 850, and we're at 440. So you can see where we are by those estimates. Now, a lot of people have taken stabs at these numbers, and they all come in something like this. Now this is from the same group, but it's a totally different thing. This is worldwide, and it's floating rigs, jackups, and semi-submersibles, and drill ships. And that's where the industry has really shrunk, and it continues to shrink. And it's because of this that I say the industry is going to be much smaller than it used to be. I have never seen the offshore business take it on the chin as hard as it has in this downturn. It really is quite something. And I'm not going to talk through all that stuff, but essentially, with the number of idle rigs that are implied by that chart, there's going to have to be a lot more rigs turning to scrap. Rigs are just going to have big rigs. Are just going to have to go away. The first part of that was easy to get rid of the old rigs, but they're now scrapping modern rigs. And those are expensive pieces of equipment, and people are going to be very wary about getting back into the rig construction business without having some secure contracts. That's new. That's new. That's an anchor on a recovery, and a minor reason that I say things have fundamentally changed. The big reasons, other than industry contraction, is that the shales now provide a rapid response supply. In the good old days, we could rely on OPEC to balance the market. It was influenced by geopolitics and so forth, and internal politics, but OPEC would normally try to accommodate the market at some price, within some price band, or within some production targets. That worked fairly well, as long as everybody else in the world was producing as much as they could, at least on a short-term basis. But that doesn't apply anymore. With shales, you can bring new supply online in response to a price increase as quickly as it takes to drill and fracture a well. And right now, with all the drilled and uncompleted wells that are out there, still some like 4,000 of those coming down, you can bring new supply on as quickly as it takes to fracture a well, to complete a well. That's new in the market. So in OPEC, in November of 2014, when the price was going down, everybody was worried, said, we're no longer going to cut production to defend the price of crude oil, because we'll just be giving up market share if we do. It made perfectly good sense. But everybody else freaked out when the price went down to 26 or whatever it was. Okay? But OPEC's out of that business. And with very sound reasoning, it's out of that business. Because now, when there's a price signal about the need for new supply, not only OPEC, but a bunch of shale producers can bring that supply on. And that creates the risk of just wiping out the price increase. Producers are now the marginal suppliers, and they're going to have to learn to accommodate that risk. They're going to have to use competitive analysis to know if they're the low-cost producer, and the ones that can ride out the price on, and they're going to have to get very smart about it. That's just market. That's just life in the market. But it's a new dimension of the market, and it's all because of the shale wells. You hear people, the shorthand for that is shale is now the new swing supply. In a gross way, that's true. OPEC isn't going to do it any longer. I don't think OPEC's going to get back in the business of doing it anymore. One of the reasons I think OPEC's not going to get back in the business of doing that is that Saudi Arabia has changed fundamentally. Make no mistake, OPEC is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the power. It has the production capacity, and it has the idle production capacity to influence the market, and it has been. It just doesn't like exerting that influence solo. It wants the cover that OPEC provides, and there are some geopolitical conveniences involved in membership in the organization. But Saudi Arabia is the key influence, has been the key influence, remains the key influence in OPEC, and Saudi Arabia is changing fundamentally. I've got a slide I'll show you in just a second on that. And then last but not least, gas liquids represent the sleeper supply. I'll go through these quickly so you can ask me questions. There's liquids production, and you can see how unconventional sources of shales dominate that. That's just a nice slide that OPEC runs. I like it. that really shows how unconventional sources dominate production. And remember about unconventional sources, this is something that I think doesn't get enough attention. When we go into unconventional resources, meaning low-quality reservoirs, the amount of recoverable hydrocarbons increases exponentially. We saw that happen with gas after the Barnett Shale. We got that olive out of the bottle, figured out how to fracture, figured out how to transfer the technology to different shales, and suddenly we're going, where'd all this gas come from? Well, it came from unconventional, it came from low-quality unconventional resources. No longer limited by dip closure and all the things that the conventional reservoirs have. There's a lot of gas out there, and now we're finding there's a lot of oil out there. Not only in the shales, but also in the oil sands. And you don't have to go find it; you know where the hydrocarbons are. This is new stuff. Saudi Arabia, watch Saudi Arabia. It was Saudi Arabia that answered to OPEC's abrogation of coordinated supply management. Some of the members didn't want it to happen, but it didn't matter. Saudi Arabia did, and it did. And again, I say for good reason. And they're restructuring their economy. They're talking about things I didn't think I would ever hear discussed in Saudi Arabia. Removing consumption subsidies for Saudis. That's politically very dicey to do that. And Saudis get very cheap gasoline, free water, and I don't know what else pretty much now, but their power is cheap, free medicine and so forth. The royal family has said we can't afford to do that anymore. Saudis are with low oil prices longer than anybody else. They're borrowing money. They can just outlast everybody. But they have said it's time to restructure. That's a huge deal, a huge change in the market. They're diversifying away from oil and doing so expressly. The Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman made an announcement when they did this economic program. He said by 2020 we don't want to be dependent on oil. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. We have a Saudi Arabia now that's no longer riveted for economic reasons to the value of crude oil, and riveted. They don't always go for price maximization. They would go for revenue maximization over periods of generations. They're not thinking in terms of generations anymore. That's where I believe that's where a lot of this change is coming from. I'm not privy to the Saudi royal family inner circle, but I've watched the Saudi for many years. And I think the Saudis look around and they see people talking about doing away with the internal combustion engine. They hear politicians talking about intentionally keeping oil in the ground. I think the Saudis are realistic enough to know that those ambitions are not going to happen, but they're going to influence policy. And they say, hey, we've got to get ours while the getting's good. And I think they're in a mode of liquidating their reserves, meaning they're going to be producing more. And make no mistake, they can produce it cheaply. That's going to put a lid on the price of crude oil. Different Saudi, they've restructured their motivations. They're investing in manufacturing. They're looking at an integrated crude petrochemical plant. In other words, make petrochemicals directly from crude oil. All the things they're doing, they're doing marine construction. All the things they're doing benefit from low crude oil prices. Okay. I'm not saying the Saudis want to see cheap oil forever. I'm just saying their motivations have changed, and I think they're going to want to produce their reserves a little faster than they would have otherwise. And I always have to say this. It's kind of scary, but I think they're motivated geopolitically. We've seen this behavior in the Persian Gulf before, where one producer feels threatened by the others will if it's able to raise crude production to lower crude prices to keep dollars out of the hands of an adversary. We saw the Kuwaitis do that against Saddam Hussein just before the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. We've seen it some other times. I think Saudi Arabia is trying to keep dollars out of Tehran, not in an apocalyptic way, at this stage, but I know that the Iranians are really miffed because they're raising production after the sanctions, and they're not getting the revenue from it that they thought they would because the price is low. And Saudi Arabia is producing a lot of oil. And this is my gee whiz slide here. This comes from OPEC. The left slide is each one of those lines is a different year, going from 2013 to 2016. 2016 and 2015 kind of overlap there, so you can't see. But I've put ovals in two places on those, one place each on those charts. One is that little price recovery we had about this time last year, where we thought things were over with. That's on the right. Okay. At that very time, Saudi Arabia lifted production by 500,000 barrels a day. Why? They didn't want the price to go up. No, why? Why didn't they? Well, some of these things were going to. But I think at that time they were motivated by the nuclear talks with Iran, and they wanted to make clear that Iran was not going to come roaring back and not going to take any. At least they weren't going to take any of Saudi Arabia's market share away, and they weren't going to get as many dollars for it. Because I've been watching Saudi production very closely ever since then, and you can see it hasn't been below 10 million barrels a day. Normal Saudi production was more like 9.2, 9.1 until all this happened. Look where it's been up there. Now, last month it was almost 10.5 million barrels a day. It was up again. Some of that is just seasonal. The Saudis burn crude oil directly to run power plants in air conditioning season. But if they cared about the price of crude oil, they wouldn't just burn it that way. They leave their production the same, and just not export as much and let that percolate through, let their demand percolate through the market and defend the price. But they're not doing that. Why is that? Again, I'm not privy to royal family secrets, but this is new behavior by the Saudis, and I think it is a structurally new dimension in the oil market that people will ignore to their peril. And last but not least, we have a sleeper supply of hydrocarbons. This is United States hydrocarbon gas liquids. That's the category that the Energy Information Administration has said. With all that natural gas production, we're getting a lot of liquids. We're exporting a lot more propane than we used to. We've started exporting ethane. Ethane requires special tankers and pipelines and everything, but we're exporting because we have greatly increasing volumes of liquids coming out of this world-class gas play that I'm talking about. And it's happening worldwide. It's contributing to the worldwide. This was an article we ran when it was in June 6th. A consultant I know, who's a specialist in condensates, he had some tables projecting the different liquids, and he said between 2014 and 2021, supply of natural gas liquids from gas plants will increase by 5.7 million barrels a day. That's like adding a major producing country to the market, okay? And it's like liquids. Now. This is my last slide. You have increased condensate, so you're splitting more condensate. You make naphtha. You export ethane to Asia and Europe, and that backs out naphtha from ethylene manufacturing. We're increasing exports of chemicals because we got petrochemical plants coming on, so we're going to be backing out petrochemicals from naphtha. We are creating a really sloppy market for naphtha, and with naphtha, if you don't turn into ethylene or other petrochemicals, about the only other thing you do is make gasoline. Gasoline is going to be cheap for a long time because of natural gas production, not because of anything that's happening in the oil market. That's amazing. And if you have gasoline, it's going to be chronically affordable. More than we've seen. Subject to swings when good bulk things happen in the market, but nevertheless, because of this, you have that, and you have people saying you're going to back up the internal combustion engine, and the likely substitute is going to be powered by electricity, which is going to be more expensive because it's going to have to come increasingly from subsidized wind and solar. You have what I call a car wreck shaping up, and I know which one's going to win. With that, I'll end. I'll have time for questions.
We didn't talk much about the Russian oil and gas economy. Where did that play in compared to
The Russian oil and gas economy is going to get left in the dust in terms of economic development because they have continued to key their economy to crude oil production. And some of the increases, like I said, had to do with favorable tax treatment of producers that the government can't afford any longer. Russia has a lot of oil, a lot of gas, but I don't think they've been smart about capitalizing on it the way the Saudis are trying to get smart, and the Emiratis as well. The same things are happening in the United Arab Emirates, trying to diversify their economies, not be so dependent on a natural resource. The other part of the Russian equation is gas, major gas supplier. International gas depends on what two entities do. Russia, whether it lowers supply to Europe, and Qatar, whether it lowers prices to Asia and Europe. If they continue to try to squeeze more price out of the market, that's going to create markets for all the other LNG players. But if they don't, if they respond to competition, in other words, LNG is going to be kind of tough because they have the supply. Russia, of course, uses pipelines, and Qatar uses LNG transportation. So Russia is important. It's always going to be important, but politically, it's questionable, and unless you're going to be mad, you're going to be out of the Summer Olympics. So. Yes, sir.
Is the Russian Arctic production going to be a significant part of the production, or how big is that?
Russian Arctic production, it's marginal because of the cost. You had Exxon, BP, Statoil go in there because the companies like that need big, slugs of production for scale to be material to their businesses. But that's really chilled off. It's too expensive right now. The hydrocarbons are still there, but I don't know where those projects fit on this more cautious plan that I think the companies are going to have. Some companies are willing to go in, like the companies that went into Iraq. They went into Iraq for bad deals, just to get the foot in the door, and they knew the contracts weren't that good, but they just wanted to get into Iraq to be there because it's so big, the potential is so big. I don't know that companies have that much adventurism anymore, especially when you've got these unconventional resources in much safer territory on good old terra firma. So there's no way to generalize about that, but that's the kind of thinking that has to be going on in the minds of the major oil companies, and I would think that the Russian offshore might be a little lower on the order that it used to be. Yes, sir.
The offshore drilling rigs, are they mothballing them, or because of costs?
Yeah, they're
Cost prohibitive to tear them down and melt them down for scrap.
It's a big conundrum for the drilling contractors. They do a cold stack and a warm stack. A warm stack, I think they leave people on the vessel and they're maintaining it. A cold stack, I think they evacuate staff and seal up the portals and so forth.
Okay, how many of these have left U.S. territorial waters and will never come back to someplace else? Venezuela, South America.
with mobile rigs, I mean that can change. If they leave, they can come back. I mean, we saw that after Macondo. A lot of drilling units left after the freeze after the Macondo tragedy, and we said, you know, they're going to get under contracts and not be back. But they enough rigs came back to get the job done. I think the important question is your former one. How long do the contractors carry all that iron that's not making revenue before they scrap it? Because their cash flow begins to really bite on them, and that's compelling. A lot of the scrapping we see now, and that's not going to go away anytime soon. I can see. So some of the cold stack rigs are going to be gone. It'll depend on which rigs and so forth. But they're big, sophisticated rigs. I've seen numbers. I can't quote them. It's not an area of expertise. The big, sophisticated rigs cost a lot of money to hold idle because they take so much maintenance. And at a time of squeezed cash flows, that can't go on for long.
Do you have any on your team, Bob, somebody watching the scoop here in Chickasha in Oklahoma on a regular basis to keep apprised of what's happening here in Oklahoma?
We don't have like one person on scoop and stack. We don't have that many people. And we did until the price crash. We were doing a supplemental publication called Unconventional Oil and Gas, and we were covering that quite a bit because we were covering all the shale plays. Now that just falls into our upstream technology editors. Paula Dietrich, who's our drill and production editor, and Tatus Dunno, who's our exploration editor. They watch it closely, but they have to watch it, along with a whole lot of other things. So it's on our scope, but that's a big, broad scope. So I wish we were still doing that conventional report. We may bring it back. We just the advertising support vanished from that. There's so many things did. Yes.
How come the government don't allocate so much that the overseas production that they export into here to help the oil companies here?
Yeah, the question is, why doesn't the government limit imports? They don't. One answer: politics. This is a very unpopular industry. There would be no, there would be no support for that. There would be no way, especially the current administration, which is really hostile to oil and gas. So that's that. I'm not being sealed with that. That's the answer.
There's a strategy called unbundling. That's what they're calling it. That's relatively new. Do you see that as a long-term, one of those fundamental changes, or is that something you're just doing right now to try to cut costs?
When I think of unbundling, you asked about unbundling. I think in terms of unbundling pipeline services, you're talking about something else. You're talking about
on the completion side, that they're going, and instead of going to Halliburton and saying, get it all on location to do a complete frac job, they're going to the chemical suppliers, the same companies that they're making each their need, because Halliburton's marketing their stuff, for example, and the trucking, everything's separate.
Yeah.
Is that a fundamental change, or is that just a
that would be a fundamental change back to some extent. And whether and the extent to which it's happening, I'm not aware of. The service companies. I don't know when it began. 10 years ago, began selling packages, and that gave a lot of producers a lot of comfort and so forth. So you had more unbundling before that happened, and it may be that they're going back away from that. I don't know, but I would not call that a fundamental change. I would call that a market response. If it happens, it'll do it because the operators think they can get a better deal that way. And before, I think they thought it was a better deal to have the packages, and that would be a major change for the service companies because a lot of them went into that, went into the bundled service business. So if it happens, it's a major change, but it's a kind of a change back away from another change that happened. So, not a very good answer, but that's about as much as I'm doing. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. We really appreciate the time. We would like to present a little small token of our appreciation to you. A Chamber of Commerce golf hat, some golf paraphernalia, and then a book on Chickasha, which I think you may find interesting on the ride back on the plane. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. Before we go, I'd also like to acknowledge a couple people in the audience. We got Steve Carson from Senator Langford's office, and of course Thomas Lewis from Congressman Cole's office. Those two guys are. Go ahead, give them. Anything related to politics right now, I think they're happy to get a hand, you know. So anyway, and once again, we really want to thank First National Bank and Trust for sponsoring this today. You can tell there's interest here because the room's full. So once again, another important event that they're willing to step up and sponsor. So the next event we have will be our State of the Education breakfast. So that'll be next month. So we'd like to see just as many people at that also. Education is really going to be interesting in the upcoming years. There's a lot of folks running for office that are new folks to that are related to education this year. So it's going to be real interesting to see. So that kind of concludes our day, and I hope you go out and have a fabulous day and make lots of money. Thank you.